Fervent Radio dives into the journeys of individuals fueled by their passions. Join us as we explore a world of fervent stories.
And a religion that celebrates creativity and freedom of expression. Yeah. I see it much more as just a form of expression. It's a form of it's so funny because I remember as a kid when I got first introduced to it and how much it just related to me. And reading rap was actually an acronym, rhythm and poetry. And that rap was one of the elements of hip hop. And then you have b-boying and, graffiti and, all these different beatboxing. But to me, really, it's just it's an energy, man. It's like and I love to see how, despite all of the negative things that you could call out for the way it's become commercialized, it really, to me, it's a celebration of creativity. It really is, because I think now it's pushing of the boundaries. Every time you think that something is hip hop, there's somebody else that's really within hip hop that's going to remind you that's not what hip hop is, and that's where people you can say what you want about your Kanye's, you can say what you want, but or people like Tyler the Creator, they are there pushing the boundaries of what hip hop is and reminding us that it's, back in the days it was like hip hop, you can't sing, you can only rap. No, now you can really sing in hip hop, and rappers sing. Or you couldn't dance, it wasn't manly enough, or you had to be from the streets, or you had to be black, or you know what I mean? All of those kind of limits keep getting pushed and broken down. And to me, it's that. In a nutshell, it's that. It's a celebration of creativity and a celebration of expression. Something as well that comes to mind is when, and one of the architects of what we call hip hop, who still lives, is without a doubt KRS-One. And KRS-One, he doesn't actively make music anymore. He's kind of become a bit of a philanthropist within hip hop, right? And he calls himself the teacher. And for those that don't know, KRS-One is an acronym as well. Knowledge reigns supreme over nearly everyone, right? Which means that knowledge is above all, blah, blah. So, he was kind of always with the goal of taking it back in all of his teachings. And I really encourage people to kind of listen to his talks. You have them all on YouTube. They're pretty epic. And in one of those talks, he explains the origin of the actual term hip hop, which I've actually not been able to cross-check this or find out if it's actually proven. But he talks about hip hop coming from being hip to your hop, which just like that sounds a bit ridiculous, like it's a nursery rhyme or something. But being hip is being aware, being in the know, right? When you're hip to something, like, oh yeah, I'm hip to that. And it doesn't get that said, that frequently nowadays, but to be hip to your hop. So you're aware of your movement, which is really crazy. It's conscious movement, think that where it comes from, underprivileged areas, 1974, South Bronx, all this kind of stuff. These are people that genuinely had nothing. And they were pushing this kind of ideology where it was all about being in conscious movement of what they were a part of. And that's always kind of blown my mind, because it's wow, people, I think a lot of people that you just ask them now what hip hop is, and they're just going to talk to you about, tough guys or whatever. But it's really way bigger. To me, it's a school of thought. It's like a religion. A religion that celebrates creativity and freedom of expression. Yeah. So I think that there are probably, in my discovery of hip hop, there are three steps that stand out in my youth. The first one is going to school. I'd be in the car going to school with my mom. My mom would be driving, and my mother loved the kind of like, the kind of black voices, black divas, so we're talking here Whitney Houston, TLC, Eternal, obviously Destiny's Child. So all that era of like 2000s R&B, but before as well. Like she loved Shaka Khan. She loved, all of these kind of Tony Braxton. She loved as well. She's more in the 90s, but so she loved all of that music, and we'd be listening to it all the time on the way to school. And I remember that within all those tracks, there would always be suddenly that featuring verse. I don't know if whoever it would be, like LL Cool J or whoever it would be, who would just make an appearance, a verse. I remember one of the tracks that would always be, because they were like compilation albums that she would get. In Spain, there was an editorial at the time that was releasing all these compilations called Blanco y Negro Mix, and you would just buy it. And for people in Spain, it's like their way of staying in tune at the time with all of these R&B records that were coming out in the States, but weren't getting played in the radio in Spain. And I remember there would always be tracks by, as I said, Tony Braxton and so forth. One that really stood out to me that was always there was Truth Hurts and Rakim. I think it's addictive or addiction. That just legendary with kind of like that Arab sample. That was always there. So anyways, I'd be in the car on my way to school listening to this, and the rapper, I was like, yo, this guy's sick. And it'd be me in the front seat and my mom kind of like grooving or whatever. So that was part number one. Then part number two, my father is a huge fan of music as well. Not so much hip hop, just general music. He's a huge fan of like Julio Iglesias, Sergio Dalma, all this kind of like Spanish music. But then he also loved Santana. He loved Dire Straits, Deep Purple, obviously the Beatles, all this kind of stuff. So in Christmas, I remember that he would always have fun with me trying to get me to DJ. And it was funny because he had no clue how to DJ, but it was just kind of like a fun, like kind of thing, where, Alvaro can play his music and I'd be there trying to DJ. I remember it was like he had like two cassette players, the CDs, and a vinyl, but he had no mixer. It was an amp, so there was no mixing. So I'd just like I'd change the source essentially. It's like, okay, now we're going from cassette to CD, and I just line up the track and change the source and play it. And that was kind of like, whatever. And they just let me pick tracks. And I was like, I'm talking here, I'd probably be like, what, 13, 14. So that was the second part. And that became kind of like a little bit of a family tradition where I'd kind of like do this in all the Christmas gatherings at my parents' house. And then the third part, which I would say that was the breakthrough moment into hip hop, was I remember in one of those, going back to my mother's compilation albums, there was one track by Tupac. I'm pretty sure it was, I think it was So Many Tears or Me Against the World, one of those legendary Pac songs. And Tupac stuck in my head. Just the name, Tupac. And one day we're sat in a restaurant that my parents still go to in San Pedro called El Ranchero. And we were sat there eating fish, and they had, the bootleggers, the guys that sold the bootleg CDs, which in Spain, now not so much. Now they sell other stuff, but it's still a bit of a social issue, right? These are illegal, if you will, immigrants from Africa that come to Spain. They have nothing to do, obviously, because they're outside of the system, other than sell all this bootleg stuff. Back then, it was CDs. And they just come up to you during dinner and trying to sell you stuff. And this guy had a bunch of CDs. And obviously, I just grab the CDs and I'm looking and I see Tupac's greatest hits. And I look at it, I'm like, yo, this. And I bought it. And I still have that bootleg CD to this day. But when I heard that is when I was like, yeah, this is me. This is me. Everything involving this, whatever the fuck it is. Can we curse? Yeah, okay, cool. Whatever the fuck this is, like this is all what I'm about. And then from then on it just became the unraveling, like just let's keep looking, keep exploring. I remember that another was Wu-Tang. At the time, obviously think that I was born in 90, so I missed, like I didn't catch like the whole era of like the 36 Chambers and all of that, I was a kid. So but I remember the first album of Wu-Tang that I bought was the W. That's the one that has like Gravel Pit and all those tracks in it. Um and I remember I was in London with my parents and I just saw HMV. And I was like, yo, I know there's rap CDs in here. And I just went in and I remember going up to the clerk and being like, "To Wang Clang." And the dude just bursting out laughing, like, what the fuck did you just say? And my father just standing there like, whatever he said kind of thing, And he was like, no, Wu-Tang, Wu-Tang. And he told me, and then aside from that, he also said to me, like, take this one, and take this one. And yeah, man, there was several albums. I remember, I don't know if I want to say this now, but I remember one of them was a Puff Daddy album. And yeah, and another one was a Ja Rule album actually, which with the flow of years, not my favorites, but it was another steps of the introduction. So yeah, I would say those were kind of like the three pivotal moments, and then from that point on, it just kind of like became kind of knowledge in my family. It's Alvaro's birthday or it's Christmas, like, oh, just get him a rap CD. And my aunt, she lived in LA because she married an American, and so every time she'd come back and she'd be like, hey, look, I just asked for a rap CD and got you this. And it'd be always, oh my God, And then obviously, like, from that point on, discovered the almighty power of piracy in the early 2000s and everything that brought, Something else just came to my mind, and something that I do want to highlight, which was a huge source for me musically, which was my neighbor Rich, and to this day, my fucking dog. Like, he had Sky, which was like UK satellite TV, and I just go round to his house, sit on his red leather sofa, grab a box of cookies, a carton of milk, and just sit there for hours watching MTV Base, all of these channels. And I remember in the UK at the time, they had Channel U. So I also got a bunch of the early underground grime stuff, but that was my source. And it was literally like, I'd be like, yo, SMS, texting him on SMS or chatting to him on MSN Messenger. Like, can I come round? And be like, yeah, dude, come round. If you come round, just sit there for hours watching these videos. He was just the friend that I had that allowed me to explore that. We had that in common. We loved it, and we caught the whole era of like G Unit and all of that. So, I remember going to his house and him showing me the Hunger for More album by Lloyd Banks, which was amazing. He also had like Confessions by Usher on CD. So he'd lend it to me, and I'd lend him one of mine, and we'd just kind of like feed off of each other like that. Yeah, I mean, well, I'm jumping here, but definitely another one who I'm still in touch with to this day is a guy called Ashwin. He was in my school. He's a producer to this day. He's actually right now writing a PhD on the influence of hip hop as a culture in his hometown of Nottingham in the UK, which is sponsored by the University of Nottingham. So his work is going to be studied. And early on as well, I remember him and I would be like sat in, because Richard wasn't in our school, Ashwin was, and him and I would be like sat in the lunch times or whatever, and just sat there with headphones on and a Discman, and just listening. And he'd be walking around as well with like the G Unit Reebok sneakers, and he, I remember he had like Snoop Dogg albums and all that era. Um, and to this day, he's still a huge, huge, huge source. Like the guy's knowledge is unbelievable. A huge source of musical knowledge. Um, so yeah, and I think another one, yeah, indirectly, there was also like mm, radio, TV, like, and it's funny because this is a lot of this is one of those things that I can attribute to my hometown, the fact that we had English radios in the south of Spain. So, shout out to like Larry Jazz and all those DJs who I'm still in touch with today. Those are like my OGs, they taught me a lot. Um, and I'd be as well in school listening to, I remember they had Lick FM and they'd just be playing like throwbacks and all this kind of stuff. And then when I actually got involved in actually making the music, I remember I bumped into him in the port and gave him one of my mixtapes and just trying to do all this stuff you do when you're a kid and you're kind of like engaging with the culture for the first time. But I knew since I was like, and you can ask anyone really that I went to school with or whatever, like the rapper, Alvaro's the rapper, or the guy that was in hip hop. And, I started rapping when I was 14 and then started recording. Rich and I would record together, um, either in my house or in his, on a microphone used for MSN Messenger, like when it was like a novelty to be able to send voice messages over the internet. Um, so yeah, we had a bunch of tracks recorded. I remember we used like beats from like The Game and beats from like Project Pat, and a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, I think that, like a huge source was just that need of discovery. It was like an infection, when we caught it, and there was other friends as well. There was a group of us. There was other people we knew, and there was other people I knew in other schools and stuff, and we kind of always had that in common. And you end up just kind of trading music or whatever. Um, and it's funny because with all of us, there was always that common denominator where if you were stung by that kind of like bug, that's staying with you. It's there. I'm 34. I can now openly say that, you know, music rules my life. For many years, everyone around me, my family, friends even, they were like, "Oh, it's a phase, you'll eventually grow out of it." And that's fine too if it would have been that. I've seen it happen to a lot of people, but um I can openly say now that it's something that has stuck with me. It's defined me as a person. Going back to like that sting, that it's still something that excites me. I'm a huge fan of football. I played my whole youth. And it was something that at one point, it kind of like, if I would have pursued it to that level, I'm not saying you would have gone anywhere, but, there was that option was there. But I chose to stick to music. And it's funny because I know I did the right thing because music still excites me more than any football game ever will. And I still enjoy football, but so I know that it's something that is lifelong for me now. Or at least I intended on being. I mean, never say never, right? But it's definitely something that I've become used to nurturing. It's something that I always try to explore and understand more of. Um, it's also crazy how much it's defined my attitude towards a lot of things. Um, that kind of like celebration of the hustler spirit, of creating something from nothing, of being in charge of your own destiny and building something up from the ground up. It's also something that has become huge in everything I do. It's kind of like in the DNA of everything I do. And it's allowed me to understand a lot of my environment wherever I went, you know. It's definitely a universal language that has translated. So to keep it grounded, like if I did something and somebody asked me, that totally unrelated to music, and somebody asked me like, well, how did you come up with this approach? I can genuinely say because of hip hop. Genuinely. Like the way that, for example, Lil Wayne was a massive inspiration for me, a massive artist that he kind of like really shaped up a lot of my fandom of music. Um, the way that he created Young Money, and Cash Money was created before that. You know, like that label to me was something that, or 50 Cent as well, you know, with G Unit, like those are all the labels that kind of really helped me have this kind of like entrepreneurial side be developed within me, and thinking of like, if you understand the codes and the language of whatever it may be. It could be hip hop, it could be Java, or it could be water polo, whatever it is. If you understand those codes, if you understand that language, it's definitely in your hands and borderline a responsibility for you to protect that language and to kind of like build around it and to contribute to it. You know, it's like an entity, and that has shaped a lot of what I do. And a lot of times I've found myself making decisions that to people may seem like, oh, that's a very moral decision, like you're a good person. It's like, cool, but a bigger part of that was because you know you're providing to a culture, you're providing to that entity. You know what I mean? Like there's that kind of like, so that's what I mean, going earlier on to it being borderline a religion. It's kind of like a school of thought, and you know, you do it for the culture. And it's funny because that kind of phrase, especially do it for the culture, it's almost like played out, right? Like it's so overdone, and you hear it get used in so many different scenarios. But I've now that I can say that I've worked with pretty, you know, major artists, when you really do it for the culture, or when you really do it with that higher purpose in mind, it's understood and it translates, and that's what connects. And that's when people really gravitate towards it. And that's something that to me actually like um it's always been a rock, because in the past, for example, I've had bad experiences, like, you know, people that know me up close know that, you know, I used to run a nightclub and how that ended and all this kind of stuff. And the people I had partnered with tried to kind of like continue what I had created. It fell apart, or it didn't go how they would have liked it to, because there was no understanding of the culture. There was no respect for that culture. You know, there was no love for the culture. At the end of the day, there's so many people involved in this becoming an industry that it generates a lot of money, that they're like, oh, what? I can do this easy, no problem. No, you can't. No, you can't. And it translates. Don't get me wrong. There are people that get away with it, and there are ways that, you know, the whole one hit wonders and people that appear and kind of like, okay, cool. But eventually, time puts all that in its place. You know. So definitely, it's. I mean, my passion for it has become a navigation tool. Yeah, I think that there are so many parts of hip hop that throughout time have been highlighted, and that, you know, maybe at that time they were, you know, they deserved being highlighted or whatever. But things about hip hop that I believe are untrue and get too much visibility. I mean, look, like I get exposed to this day in and day out. You know, the minute you tell people, especially in Spain, which is a country that culturally has been, you know, it's kind of been in a bit of a how would you call it, like time stopped here for some time. You know, let's not forget that there was no exterior input culturally of any kind for many years, and that has delayed its integration of foreign cultures in comparison to other countries around it, like France, UK, Germany, etc. So here I get it a lot, where you tell people you're in hip hop, or you tell people you used to rap, and the first thing they do is like yo yo yo, or like put their hat to the side and do all this kind of stuff, or like pull like trigger fingers, like gun fingers or whatever. And again, like you clearly haven't heard a lot of the amazing hip hop that doesn't even get close to that. And going back to the start, it's that kind of honest expression. Have you heard of Tribe? Have you heard of De La? Have you all of these artists and many more, even if you go underground to people like Binary Star or Atmosphere, or there's so many. Sure, you have the Ill Bills and the Necros and all these, which are probably even way further than what they depict, which are these dudes talking about, it's kind of also that line that Eminem took, where it was also early Eminem, like that horrorcore kind of thing, where it was like, yo, I'll stab you in your head with your nose bone or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, sure, there is all of that. But because it is honest expression. It's funny, I was recently this summer at a festival that we booked an artist for, and they had this young trap artist from Spain on stage. He'd sold like 2,000 tickets, and the guy's just up there like talking about, drugs and sex and all this kind of stuff. And the bookers of the festival are just sat there with their mouth wide open, And I went up to them and I was like, what do you think? They were like, this is horrendous. Like, I can't believe this is selling tickets. And I was just standing there. I was like, well, I mean, Vin Diesel sells tickets to a movie of him driving cars and, you know what I mean? Like smashing them or whatever he's doing. I haven't seen them for a while, but you know what I mean? Like, these are all, why is that not applied? You know what I mean? These are people that create a persona or a character, and this is their way of art, and this is their way of their output, whatever it may be, Anthony Joshua is probably a lovely guy when you meet him in person, but when he's in a ring, he's an absolute animal. Or John Jones, you know what I mean? So it's the same thing. When these guys go on stage, they just kind of adopt this, this energy, and this is the thing that kind of takes them in. You could even say that it's what a priest does when he's in an altar. You know what I mean? Like, maybe that guy at home is totally different and is watching the football or whatever, and he's a totally, you know what I mean? Like, so there is so much of this that to me is very fascinating, about how it's a bit of a pick and choose to how certain art gets pulled apart and why. And I think hip hop has definitely been overly scrutinized, and now people don't understand. Play the top 50 tracks in any country in the world, excluding the blatant hip hop ones, because I'm sure there will be plenty. And I guarantee you that in all of those songs, you will hear influence from hip hop. People aren't aware. They aren't aware of the impact this genre had. And how many elements of what is around them, prevail today. I mean, the figure of a DJ, really. DJs, any genre, like, sure, you had your Larry Levans and all these guys, but you go back to 1970s and, Kool Herc and all these guys, and they created the crossfader. Without a crossfader, there is no DJ, and that is all from hip hop. And so many other things, Also, I think a very big mention has to be given to jazz, and I don't want to go off the beaten path, but jazz as well has, that's the origins of everything that hip hop then kind of like developed. But a lot of that mentality before in hip hop used to be in jazz, for sure. The thing that is overlooked frequently about hip hop is what I said at the start, that celebration of creativity. Like, there are so many amazing lines within hip hop that allow for so many things to just brew. I mean, look at, Virgil, Pharrell, their crossovers into fashion from and in massive fashion houses, man, like Louis and they used to be in Fendi, him and Kanye and all this kind of stuff. Like all of these places, art as well, like now seeing loads of artists who are clearly inspired by hip hop, and that's exactly what I was talking about at the start. It's the ultimate celebration of creativity to me, because it allows for so many different things to partake that maybe other genres don't, or don't allow for that much. You don't see many DJs of electronic music who have clothing brands. You know what I mean? Or you don't see many, um, I don't know, you don't see many, what could I say, rock bands that have media outlets. You know what I mean? That's kind of like a very separate thing. Whereas in hip hop, it all becomes an excuse to express yourself, and that just breeds so much to the world. I want to think that podcasting itself, like if you look now, so many of these kind of like older rappers, their kind of way to stay relevant and with zero shame is to have a podcast. Nori with Drink Champs, or Ti with his one, Danny Brown. All of these guys are, Cameron even, that is a hilarious podcast. It is what it is, the sport podcast. And there's zero shame in it. There's zero like, oh, I'm gonna be seen as the guy who can't rap anymore. Like, no. Why? Because this is a form of expression. This is I'm just applying the way I express myself on a beat to now expressing myself on a podcast. And it doesn't overlap with any of the other ones, because there's another 30 artists of my same generation that are doing podcasts, because we each have our own form of expression and we each have our own guests. Um, and I think that's beautiful. And that's just, and the same with the clothing brands. When there was that era that, Jay had Rockaware and Puff had Sean John, and I shouldn't even mentioning Puff Daddy, I'm sorry. But 50 had, G Unit and all of these different brands. It was also the same, it was the same idea. Like, what's your form of seeing it? That's why it's that combination of creativity with that hustler spirit, and that kind of like dream it and make it kind of thing. And that's definitely something that I wish would come more to people's minds. I think it does in the States, and it is definitely becoming that in the UK as well. But in many other countries, it isn't that. It's still just seen as a genre of like dudes that are, you know, poets, which they are, but there's much more behind it. Earlier, for example, we were talking about like um, passion, and how it's, my passion for hip hop has shaped the way I approach everything. One of the things that I have managed to really take away, and that I wish I could say to more people, and I do when I have the level of confidence without feeling like I'm intruding in people's kind of vibe or whatever. But I know that it's something I'm going to teach my kids for sure, is to definitely, make your passion your job, or aim to, or strive to. There will be ups and downs, but to me, it's something that it's absolutely tireless. And I see people that, don't get me wrong, they're in much better places than me, than I am in life in regards to like financial stability or whatever. But I see their hearts are not full. And that to me is something that, I guess it also depends how intensely you live it. But that is without a doubt, going back to that answer earlier, like one of my biggest lessons that I've received from this culture and this way of thinking is that same thing. Like, the passion has to be the job. And if it isn't, it won't last long, and it will change. And you'll find yourself, I mean, I don't want to be negative, but I don't think that it will be as fulfilling of a path. Um, well, I guess maybe for a lot of people, they don't need that. And that's fine too. I don't want to, I definitely, I'm just speaking from my truth. But I think that it's definitely like a must. You have to make a job out of your passion. To me, yes, because it's the best way of really kind of like surviving. Like of really knowing that you provide something that creates an impact. Um, but again, going back to it, there are people that are happy doing whatever it may be without it needing to be their passion, and that's totally fine as well. But in my opinion, yes, because that's the way. If you strive for really leaving a mark, and really kind of achieving some form of I don't like the word recognition. I don't like, like, because that's at the end of the day, but of achieving something that just lasts, that really helps other people. It's funny because it's like it makes me think of an NGO. And a lot of people around me, close to me, and my family as well, they'd be like, "Oh, it's like the charitable music guy that is out here just." But there are ways to turn that into, that's how the Facebooks are created. That's how the Def Jams are created. All those bursts of passion that become jobs. If it wasn't for Rick Rubin and his passion, nobody would be leading their lives right now thanks to that book. And I'm seeing people of all lines of work read that book as if it was their Bible. And that is exclusively driven by passion that he has turned into his job. Which, for those that don't know, Rick Rubin is one of the architects of modern day hip hop, without a doubt. Look into the story, Def Jam Records. He created Def Jam Records with Russell Simmons in a university room, in a dorm room in the New York University, signed Run DMC, signed LL Cool J, and then shaped everything we know in hip hop. And now he's like this spiritual, and nobody would see it. They see him as this like adorable kind of like older kind of yogi guy. But, hip hop made that in a way. He had his own path, I'm sure, but that's definitely a segue of hip hop for sure. My perspective on hip hop now, I think it's in the best place it's been. It is true that if we look at the timeline of hip hop, many can say that in the second half of the early 2000s is when that excessive commercialization kind of just became too much, and that's when it really, you could see so much money was suddenly being poured into it. The cars, the jewelry, everything was so much about luxury and all of this kind of stuff. And it had kind of lost a little bit of its essence, but there was still pretty great music that was being made, but there was a lot more. And that's when also I have to say the industry caught on. And that's when the industry created a trend that was very damaging, which were, you hear a lot about like the 360 deals, which essentially means that artists were signing deals that they don't know what they were signing and that were very damaging to them on the long run, in which they were essentially signing their life away and they weren't really aware of it, and they would end up in a lot of debt, tied up into these major corporations. It was a bit of a Wild West scenario. Now artists are a lot more aware. I think that it's beautiful. I am lucky enough to have lived what they call the renaissance of hip hop, which was the 2010s, in my opinion. All that era from 2010 till 2018, along the lines, you saw the birth of wow. I mean, like from Kendrick to J. Cole, Drake, all the early stuff of Drake. You can say whatever you want about Drake, but he's an absolutely timeless artist who has really put the numbers on the board. And his early stuff, I will never forget, like listening to that first So Far Gone mixtape and thinking, what the hell is this? And then even, your Joey Badasses, your is just so many artists. Even people like Action Bronson, Action Bronson to me is a fascinating character. Somebody that has taken, again, that mentality of hip hop and taken it under his own interpretation of it. And he's doing all these cooking shows, and he's doing now his own clothing brand and the book and all this and all that. And he's amazing, man, and the music is still dope. It really is. Like, and it's all he's now painting the artwork for the, again, like it's that just constant celebration of creativity. So all of these artists, obviously the ASAPs and all of these guys, so all of that era was so necessary, and I was lucky enough to live that when I was in my height of my kind of like early fanboy years, if you will, before I actually got into the industry as being nothing but a fan. And um and it was beautiful, and I think that has kind of shaped a lot of what's happening today. And the fact that now the power, it lies now in smaller labels. Well, smaller, they're still huge, but people from like TDE, or like everything under the Tyler the Creator brand, to me is just fascinating. The guy's just an absolute genius. um but how now it's become the trend, and the vocal and the voice is being set by the artist. It's not being set by the labels. And that was so necessary, and that's now becoming the norm. I was just watching earlier today the sets of Camp Flognor, which is Tyler's festival in LA. The lineup was mind blowing, and the sets. We're talking about a major festival now. It's actually, I think it was its 10th anniversary. And not too many years ago, it was seen as a little kind of like idea that a rapper had to create his own little festival, and yeah, he was big, but whatever. Now it's like, and it's on its way to becoming a major culture shaping, you know, event. And that's amazing. And I think there's going to be more and more of that, where artists are now, again, taking that celebration of creativity, and now we can now create our own festivals. We can now do this. And that's, again, it's not happening in other genres in that way. And so I think hip hop is in a great space. I really do. The younger generations, I can't say I connect with as much. I'm actually seeing myself becoming that old guy that in the 2010s, I didn't like what they had to say about ASAP and all of them when they were coming out. But, I'm lucky enough to work with young artists that are really active, and they show me music, and I see their reaction, and I go in the studio and I see them and all their friends and how they play the song that I may not connect with as much, but seeing them listen to it, I'm like, wow, I now get it. It's one of those things that you're like, if you heard it on your headphones alone, okay, whatever. And then you suddenly go to see it in a live show, you see everybody going nuts to it, and how it makes them feel, and boom, you get it, and it's that language. I don't think that there's nothing negative, as long as the pure and raw energy and mentality of hip hop is maintained. As long as those people are there, that gatekeeping, which essentially has to be there, it has to, because, and that's why there's such important figures, Snoop, Dre, 50, all these guys are now in their 50s, and they are the ones that are still vocal in the culture, and they'll still give their opinions, and they'll still be like, oh, this yes, this no. Because, at the end of the day, they're like the headmaster of the school in a way. I'm not saying that whatever they say has to go, but people still listen to you, and your voice is still very relevant, and you're considered a legend now. So the fact that those figures are now still very empowered, because there are a lot of gimmicks, and that is also due to the accessibility of internet. Something that comes to mind is like the Island Boys, like all of that kind of stuff. Like, no, sorry, but no, this is not allowed. At least not allowed under the umbrella of hip hop. If you're a couple of kids that just want to do this stuff, and okay, cool, whatever, but don't try to call yourselves hip hop. And that's when the culture itself needs to be, the bar needs to be set and maintained, and it's down to the rest of the culture to turn around and say no. And that, what's fascinating, me being Spanish, I talk about this a lot. I think the only genre that has never let its guard down in regards to that, from all the genres I know, is flamenco. Flamenco, you are not allowed in. You can, and this is the thing, if you can make, I was recently at a show. We were on a festival, we were on tour, and we saw a band performing after us. And respectfully, I didn't like it. And I said something to somebody that was there with us, and they asked me, like, hey, do you like it? And I said to them, I was like, just because you can make words rhyme doesn't mean you can rap. Like there has to be, there's so many other factors involved and levels and layers, from your persona to your codes, like, everything. You have to be in tune. Flamenco is something that has never let its guard down. That's also maybe why it's never been managed to be commercialized, or it's not that known. Fair enough. I think now that's starting to change. It's something that in Spain people are very proud to see, you know, strokes of flamenco in modern music and how that's kind of crossing genres. And yes, Rosalia definitely has to do a lot of that. She has to do with a lot of that. But now she's not making flamenco. Like if you listen to Los Angeles, the album before El Mal Querer, the one with Malamente, that is a pure flamenco, like cante. It's an insane voice just doing absolute acrobatics. But obviously, no kid in America is going to listen to that. It doesn't have the appeal. So going back to hip hop did let its guard down. And I saw recently, I heard a podcast with a radio host in the States. I think it was Ebro from Hot 97. And he was saying he's a bit of he's known for being a bit cynical with all these kind of stuff. But he was like, the current state of hip hop is all down to us. For many years, we allowed. And that is very true. It is very true. Because, and that is also, I think it's also down to how a lot of the paraphernalia around the genre, you know, by that I mean Instagram profiles that share a rapper in a strip club or a rapper getting into a fight, or you know what I mean, like a bunch of extra stuff. And now you have dudes that are blowing up because they were seen on a video on World Star. That's not really, you know what I mean? Um, but I do think that it's definitely, you know, in a grand scheme of things, it's in a great position. There's still amazing music being made. I can even go as far as saying some of the amazing albums. Obviously, the latest Tyler album, Chromacopia, is beautiful. Freddie Gibbs' latest album is amazing. West Side Gun's album is dope. If you like hardcore or hip hop, Doechii, amazing. I mean, Ab Soul put out another album, which is always great news. There's just loads. It's constant. It's almost hard to keep up. Action Bronson also put out another album. So there's and aside from that, all of like the regional sounds. I'm listening to kids in Spain making music now who are 18, 19 years old that sound like Gucci Mane in 2012. And that is dope. That is dope because and it's not a gimmick. Like they you can tell that they've studied it and they're putting their own twist on it and they're telling their stories. At the end of the day, this whole culture was built on something that previously existed to create something new. That's what when you see DJs, the whole thing of the breaks. Like if you listen to Curtis Blow, that song, The Breaks, and these are the breaks. Da, 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 da. He's referring to the breaks in the tracks. Literally, the gaps in the song that have no vocals, the breaks. And those were what a DJ would do is they would get two turntables of two copies of the same record, and they would turn one back, play the break, turn the other one back, hit the crossfader, play the break, and then the beat would just keep going. And that's how they got their hands on instrumentals when none of them knew how to play any instruments, you know what I mean? So they were building on something that was previously created. And as long as that still keeps getting done and, people still respect the art form, it will happen that because of the era we live in and how accessible it all is, and there will be that level of glamorization or another thing I see a lot is that culture is now becoming a cool currency. You know, people use culture to, or more like culture on the internet is now being used as like a way to get cool points kind of thing. And that's fine. Don't get me wrong. People will, people need to express themselves. But um, when it starts to cross over into actually being active parts of the culture is when it can be damaging, because you may not understand the culture. You may not have done your homework. You may not really know what it's, you can't start building a house from the roof. You need to know the pillars, the floor level. So, and I would even go as far as you need to know the basement. You need to know the fucking underground. You need to do all that homework, and you need to spend hours on YouTube nowadays, or for me it used to be on on LimeWire, or Morpheus, on BearShare. I would literally, in all these P2P, or even before that, it was DatPiff, Two Dope Boys, Pigeons and Planes in the blog era. All of these blogs where you'd find out like what this regional sound is. Oh, this subgenre of hip hop called go-go that is being made in the DMV and like Virginia and all of this. Okay, whatever. Yeah, whatever. Timbaland, Missy Elliott, Pharrell, all come from there. And they're all from that region. Virginia, Washington DC, sorry. So you start, and then for example, the Memphis sound, how like 3-6 Mafia and all of these guys, 8 Ball and MJG, how they shaped a lot of what eventually became trap, or why A$AP Rocky sounded like a Houston rapper, like all of those codes, all of those links, when they get studied, allow for new links to be made. And if people try to make those new links without having that previous information, is when the culture gets diluted, because you're doing things that don't make sense for the culture, in my opinion. I am nobody, I'm not a policeman, like I don't tend to be, but in my opinion, that's when it all begins to start to rattle. And I don't want to limit anybody's creativity, but I do think that there has to be that little bit of flamenco in there,
Fervent Radio dives into the journeys of individuals fueled by their passions. Join us as we explore a world of fervent stories.